Right, so for this video, our main objective will be to add a character to our game. And then with that character, we're gonna add the movement and jump behaviors. Right? We're gonna program them. Now to get that character, get the assets in the description. Now this is a long video and it's very dense, so be sure that you pause it, take your time, and continue. Okay, so here we are in the Drive folder that I link you in the description. We'll go ahead and download both files. So we have the background one and the character. Those are sprites, which are 2D images that will be put in the engine. Right, so I'm dragging them from my Google Chrome to the Unity page, right in the project tab that I explained in the previous video. And as you can see from the project tab, you can just drag it straight to the scene. As you can see, it is quite big, and you can see that it's displayed on the game tab. That's because it's inside of the camera. And now to rotate, scale, and move it, I'm using the W, E, and R keys on the keyboard. Right, so those are the shortcut keys for the transform parameters on the right side. Right, as you can see, when I move it, the position starts to change. Right, so when we have our character scaled down, we're gonna go ahead and put the background on it. The background is gonna act like a platform, so it should be called like ground, not background. My fault, but never mind. Okay, once we have it set up, we can try it. Alright, so I'm checking just that all the variables are in the game. We'll go ahead and press play. So nothing happens, really. That's because there's no interaction between the elements. There are no physics in the game. We want to go ahead, select the background and add the Box Collider 2D. Unity is a component engine. This means that each behavior that we want to add needs its own component, right? So the Box Collider allows this component to collide with other box colliders or cycle colliders. Notice that we're using the 2D, right? So I've added a box collider to the character, a box collider to the floor, and nothing happens. This is because collision doesn't mean actual physics, right? So you want the character to fall, to have a gravity. To do so, we're gonna add a rigid body. A rigid body means that this object is now affected by the game physics. As you can see, we have a gravity scale that now will apply to the character. Notice that if your game is gonna maximize out, just click on the tab Maximize on Plane, which is barely in the center of the screen. Just be sure that this is untapped so you can see all the layouts at once while in play mode. Okay, now I'm gonna edit the box collider on the character. I'm doing this because it was too big and I want to adjust it, right? So be sure not to misclick and it's gonna be unselected. And once you have it done, you can try it and you'll see that box colliders adjust each other and just collide the way that they should. Notice that I changed the gravity scale, so now the object falls way faster. This will influence the jump mechanic that we're gonna implement. Right, so now we have it set up, we have our character, we have our floor, and we have a falling behavior. We'll go ahead and create a C# script called character. In this C# script, we're gonna add the movement and the jump. Oh, and also a jump check, so we don't want to add multiple jumps. Right, double click the character script and we'll be straight to the Visual Studio Code. This is a basic C# script. We have a public class, which is the behavior of the character itself. Then we have a variables zone that I just typed out the comment, right? So if you put 2 slashes, that's comment. That's no actual code. And now I'm gonna start typing the variables, right? So we want to access the rigid body in the code to change velocities and add forces to it. So when we jump, we add a force, like putting something on your hand, over your hand, and just like pushing it with the other. Then we add a movement speed, which we're going to use to move the character. A float variable is just a number, which is like 2.3. Be sure to add an F to the end of the number, so it is a float and not a double, which is a different kind of number. Right, and last but not least, we're going to add the jump force, which is the force that will be applied. Notice that the variables are public and private. The public variables are going to show in the inspector. We'll see that later. Now, we're going to start getting the rigid body, our own component, right? So we gotta store what we call a reference. A rigid body reference is just something that points to a rigid body. So when we call it, we know which rigid body it is. And just notice that it is this this dot get component, which means that we're pointing to ourselves. Then on the update part, be sure that check that void start just runs once when the game starts, and void update runs every single frame, right? So the normal frame rate is 60 frames per second. So this means that runs 60 times per second. To move the character, we have to check if the player has used the horizontal axis. Now, the horizontal axis is defined in the input section of the Unity engine. And if we check it, we can see that it's defined by the A and D keys and also the right and left arrows. Those are positive and negative inputs, which give us a value between 1 and -1. Using this, we can change the velocity of our character to move it with the horizontal input. Right, so when we want to change the velocity, we gotta access the rigid body. This is where the velocity and other variables are stored, like the gravity. When we want to change the velocity, we have to give it an x and y value, which are stored in a vector too. On the x value, we're going to use the horizontal axis, which will give us access to the right, left, A and D keys, and give a value to them. And on the y-axis, we want to remain the same velocity that we have, so when we move, we don't cancel the vertical velocity. With all of this done, the character should move. Now we're going to Unity and we can check it. Now notice that when we select the character, on the right bottom side, the public variables appear. Now if we press play, our character should move. But as you can see, I'm now pressing A and D and it's not moving. We have two errors in this code. The first one is that we forgot adding the movement speed for the character, which adds a +10. Oh, sorry, it multiplies by 10 the horizontal axis, so it gives us a bigger value. Right, so just after the input get axis, we add the movement speed. And as you can see now, I'm gonna press and it's gonna move just a little bit. First of all, we forgot to save the movement speed. So now I'm gonna change it and you'll see that nothing happens. Please note that when you change something on the play mode, the change doesn't save, right? So as you can see now, the movement speed was 10. Now this little dot on the top side means that we haven't saved our work. So we're gonna press Ctrl S to save it. Now, if we change the variables, they're gonna work. And as you can see, the character moves along the way. Right, so now that we have this done, we're gonna add the jump behavior. To add the jump, we're gonna check if our player presses a space, right? So let's pay special attention to the word if, right? So we're gonna start with if our input for the space key is true, right? And be very careful. We want to use get key down, which only returns true that the key was pressed the moment we press it. If we use get key, it's gonna always say that we're pressing the key, right? So we don't want an infinite jump. We want to jump only when we press it. Get key down is the way. right? So we check the get key down in the space, and first of all, before jumping, we're gonna set the velocity to 0, right? But just in the y-axis. So we access the velocity, the x value, we're gonna set it the same, and on the y value, we're gonna set it to 0. So if we are falling when we jump, the fall force, let's say the gravity force, gets nullified. It's just 0 now. After this, we add force to the rigid body. Adding force is just adding an impulse, right? It's a force in a split second. We add a y force, right? So this wants a vector 2, an x value, which is 0, and a y force, which is jump force. Now, if we check that code, if we press space, our y velocity is set to 0, and then we add a jump force. Very important to save the code. Don't forget it, because if you don't do it, it's not gonna work. Right, so let's try it. We have our character, we press space, and nothing's happening, right? So is it an error in the code? Let's try swapping the variable. Remember, we have a very strong gravity. So now, oops, the character starts jumping, right? We're gonna change the values, and this is really important. If the character leaves the camera, he stops rendering the screen. So we gotta tweak the values. I use 1200 for the jump value, and maybe you could change the gravity, change other settings. Remember that when you change settings on the blade mode, they don't save, right? So be sure to exit blade mode and change them by yourself. Now this is not a problem. We can jump indefinitely. To fix this, it's gotta make it a little bit trickier, because we gotta add another game object. It's called a ground check, and it's a point in space that just checks if it's inside the ground. So we're gonna create an empty object called ground check inside our character. Now, ground check is a child of the character, which means that it will always follow him. We're gonna add a little indicator, which is now occluded by the camera icon. And by pressing W, we're gonna move it. We want to move it just a little bit lower, just under the box collider, and center it in the character. Now, as you can see, I'm trying to adjust it a little bit, just moving it a bit up. Right. And when I have it adjusted, that I think that it's okay, we're gonna make another change, right? So we're gonna tell the ground that it is the ground, right? So we've been supposing that this is the ground, but the engine doesn't know. We're gonna add a layer. A layer is a physics, let's say, concept that allows us to make things collide and ignore each other. So, for example, if a bullet is in the enemy layer, it's gonna hit me but not the enemy, right? We can use those names to check if we are on the ground or not. Right, on the code, we're gonna add the game object, very important to be public, the ground check, because we want to access its position. Then we're gonna add the layer mask. The layer mask is that ground little thing that we just added. And we're gonna tell it what is ground, which layer is ground. Right, so once we have it, be sure that your layer is set to ground on the ground object. And then last but not the least, we're gonna add another variable, a private one now, a boolean, which is a true or false statement, which is called can I jump, or just can jump, right? So when can jump is set to true, we will jump, we'll be able to jump. And if not, we won't be able to jump, right? So in the check, if the user presses space and we can jump, right? So that double ampersand means and, right? So we press space and we can jump, then we're gonna execute that code. Once we have the can jump variable tied to the jump part, we're gonna run a fixed update. Now this is a special function used only for physics. It's like a normal update, but it runs on a different pace, in a pace of its own, so it doesn't give any error. Now in this part we're gonna check if the ground check is inside something within the layer ground. To do this, we're gonna use the physics 2D functionality and one that is called overlapped circle. We're gonna set the gain jump to the result of that function. That function then takes a point, which is the ground check, then a radius, which will be using 0.1, just a little radius to give it space. And last but not the least, the layer mask, right? So what is ground? So if we collide with something that is not ground, we cannot jump. But if we collide with something that is ground, we can jump. Alright, now that we have this, be sure to save the code and jump to Unity. Now we're going to check if this works. And note that on the bottom side there's a red message that says, hey, there's some variables that haven't been assigned. Right, so if we click the arrow on the console tab, we can see that the character is giving us that warning. If we check the script, we can see that we haven't assigned the ground check and the what is ground variables. First of all, we're gonna set the what is ground to the actual ground layer, and then we're gonna drag and drop the ground check on its tab. Now, when we hit play, all the errors should be gone. Be sure to clear the console to check it. And now we're going to just make our character jump. As you can see, now we have a normal movement, and we're gonna make a very quick platform. We're just going to copy and paste the ground and move it. We're gonna scale it down and put it just a little bit up so our character cannot walk through it. And we're gonna see another error that most of the times people don't realize it's there. Now, if I'm moving my character, you can see that he trips, right? We don't want this behavior. Now, to fix that behavior, we're gonna select the character and go to the rigid body part. On the bottom side, you can see the constraints, and we're gonna constrain the rotation, right? So this doesn't allow our character to rotate. And as you can see now, I'll try to trip, but I can't. And as you can see, the box collider sometimes gets stuck in the wall, and we're gonna fix that later. Now, let's go to the box collider. Let's remove it, and let's add a capsule collider. This is an optimized collider. As you can see now, it looks like a circle, but it's a capsule. I'm gonna edit it so you can see just a tiny bit of radius that it has. You can edit it manually, so that's what I'm doing right now. Just be sure to not misclick and make it side to the character, always leaving that little space for the ground check and this character itself that it's floating. And now the collider will respond much better, and there's no need to constrain anything since the capsule collider does it all by itself. Right, we're almost set. The only thing that's left is moving the camera, and since the ground check moved with our character, since it's inside it, let's say it's a child of the character, we're gonna make the camera a child of the character. Be sure to make it to 0, 0, -10 in the position. Now you're going to see it. I'm gonna swap to 3D view, right? So this is our game in 3D, and as you can see, the camera is just slightly on the back of the scene because this happens when we move it in front of the scene. It gets occluded. So we'll leave it to -10, and now when we hit play, everything should move fine and smoothly. The camera should follow our character, and everything will be set.